Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Northwest Craftsman. Today we're going to be building one of the cheapest and most effective air filters that you can get for your shop. Alrighty, let's get going. Alrighty, so here are all the supplies that we're going to need to get started. Key elements are a high flow metallic fan. I'm using a Lasco brand fan, and then you're going to need some HVAC filters. Now, full credit for this design and all of this testing goes to the ShopHacks team. I've left a link down in the description below. They did a phenomenal write-up on why this particular set of elements is so much better than every other air filter on the market, and even better, it's cheaper than pretty much everything else on the market. All right, let's get into the actual building of this thing. Alrighty, first up, we need to disassemble this fan in the way that it came. It came with this stand attached to it, and then also the control knob over here. If you're going to be getting your own, make sure that you can detach the control knob. Some of them have it mounted to the body, which makes it more difficult to get it off, but in this case, I basically just pull it off the leg, and we're good to go. What we need to do is get it all disconnected so that I can measure how big of a hole I actually need to be putting in my sheet of plywood so that I can mount this inside of the front piece. After getting this guy fully cleaned up, because I was using it in my shop to circulate air, so it was pretty dusty, but after getting this guy fully disassembled and cleaned up, I'm going to measure from the inside of this ring on the outside of the fan so that I can measure how big of a hole I need to cut in my sheet of plywood so that this lip can sit on the plywood all the way around. My measurement in this case was 21.5 inches, but if you're doing this build, always measure it because every fan is just a little bit different. Even this fan is different than the one that they were using on the ShopHacks build. So measure it every time and you're never gonna have an issue. But once I know the measurement there, which again for me was 21.5 inches, I can get a piece of 3/4 inch plywood, and I actually just happen to have one that was about the right size. I may trim this guy down a little bit, but here's what that looks like about. Here you can see what it looks like when I've got the fan sitting on top of the sheet of plywood. Now the sheet of plywood is about 27 inches wide by 30 inches long, so I'm going to go ahead and rip this down and just make it square, or cut it down and just make it square so that it is 27 inches by 27 inches. That should give us, if I measure from the outside of that little flange there to the outside of this little flange here, that's almost 24 inches, which means that I should have about 1.5 inches on either side to throw a 1/2 inch sheet of plywood. And that's what I'm going to use for the sides as I'm running top to bottom. With that all trimmed up and square, next thing I need to do is find the center of this board and then mark the diameter that I need to cut out. Before moving forward, I wanted to talk about the two different methods that you saw me doing the circle with. First one was with my giant divider. Now, realistically, a compass is a better tool to do this with because the divider, I just learned, is still too flexible in this direction, which means that when it hit wood grain as I was trying to mark it, it would follow the wood grain and basically it would come in closer. Going further away, not an issue because you've got this bolt right here, but when it hit wood grain that would try and push it in, it would basically make the circle smaller, which is no good because I need a circle. So the next method I did was I put a screw right in the center of the board, and then I basically took a string with a Sharpie and marked it all the way around. Not perfect because the string really needs to be as close to the bottom of the Sharpie as possible so that you can't tilt it back and forth. That's the issue that I ran into over here. And then also, as you're bringing it around, the length changes because you're slowly unraveling the Sharpie around, and so as the Sharpie rotates, it basically gets a little bit further away or a little bit closer depending on which way you wrapped the string around the Sharpie. Neither of which is really perfect, but I was able to measure it in the end and I got a good enough cut for my circle. So if you're doing it, those are two different methods that you can use. I just need to get a proper compass so that I can do these circles properly. Alrighty, here comes the moment of truth to see whether or not this hole fits the fan the way that I want it to. And we've got a winner. Love it when things get cut right the first time. Now that I got this hole drilled, what I want to do is get these sides measured so that I can make them. But the challenge is I want my fan to be removable so that if I ever want to pull the fan out without disassembling the entire filter, I have the ability to pull it out through one of the filter slots that's going to be on the side. But the problem is that fan is bigger than one of these filters. So what I'm thinking about doing is on the top side, I'm going to do a 20 by 25, but I want to confirm that if I make a 20 by 25, the fan can fit through it. And the way that I'm going to do that is use some scrap wood to mock up what the opening is going to look like. Okay, let's get that checked out. Alright, so I actually ended up making this just a little bit smaller, 18 by 18 inch opening so that I had plenty of interface room around the outside when I'm actually going to put my filters over it. Essentially, you might be able to see this here. I wanted to make sure that my filters actually had something to interface with all the way around, so the opening is slightly smaller than 20 inches by 20 inches, because if the opening was exactly 20 inches by 20 inches, the filters would fall right through. So at 18 inches by 18 inches, I would be trying to fit this fan through diagonally, and it looks like I'm gonna get just lucky and I'll be able to fit the fan through there, which is perfect because that means I can make everything for the 20 by 20 inch filters. Alrighty, so to make my life a little bit easier when I'm cutting the plywood to fit these filters into it, what I'm planning on doing is doing 24 inches by 24 inches, which will make it smaller than the opening that I had in the front, but it will make it larger than these are here, so that I've got plenty of room to interface, put hardware around the outside, and because it's 24 inches, or probably a hair shy of 24 inches, that means I can get 2 out of a width of a 4-foot sheet of plywood. Now that I've got my sides cut, I'm going to go ahead and cut that last 27 inch by 27 inch piece that's going to be in the back, and I have to take that out of an entirely fresh piece of 3/4 inch plywood, which is kind of unfortunate, but it is what it is. My table saw is not large enough for me to fit a panel on it, so this is the way that I slice and dice panels prior to getting them to table saw size, and it's my pseudo track saw. Basically, it's a circular saw with a piece of plywood so that I can cut it in a straight line, and this is what that looks like. Okay, so to explain my thoughts a little bit on how I want to do these sides, what I would like to do is have one solid bottom, and this is going to be going front to back, so basically fan is going to sit here, back of the box is going to be over there, and then on either side, I would like another piece of the plywood to sit basically flush with the bottom. Now what that means is that the inside gap is a hair under, actually it should be about 1 inch on the dot under 24 inches. But the reason I want these side pieces to sit on these is because I want these bottom pieces to support the sides. Now, all of these are going to have a dado both in the front and in the back so that they're going to interface, but I would just, my intuition tells me I'd rather have something resting on an interface with something else rather than having it sitting freely in the air. Now, it's going to be glued, caulked, and nailed, so theoretically it shouldn't matter, but I like it better like this anyways. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the dados into these 3/4 inch pieces, and I need to be careful because these are sitting on top, which means that these guys can be every 24 inches and actually have to be every 24 inches because of these sides, but these ones are going to have to be a 1/2 inch further in so that they interface properly with the bottom. Okay, so to cut these dados, I'm going to be using something called a dado stack. Now a dado stack is essentially table saw blades that stack together to form the thickness of dado that you want to cut. So you've got your 2 edge blades that sandwich these chippers that just look like this, so that basically just hog out material in the center. And basically what you do is you stack them together. Let me get these together properly. You stack these together, and then when they're inside of your table saw, it will cut your dado to the correct size. Every dado stack is gonna come with a cheat sheet, which basically says what size dado do you wanna cut and what combination of things do you need to put together, whether it's the outside blades always have to be there, which will form the minimum. So I can only do a 1/4 inch at the smallest because I've got two 1/8 inch dados, or dado edge blades. But then you've got your chippers, which are the things that I showed you right there. And then you also have spacers, which you can see here, which are a little bit thinner. They don't cut, but they just space the blades out. And then you've also got washers, which sit underneath these. So pretty much any combination of these will get you, as you can see here, all these different combinations of dado sizes that you can really foreseeably use. In this case, I'm going to be using a 1/2 inch, which I use very commonly, so I know that it's the 2 edge blades plus 2 chippers gets me a 1/2 inch. The other thing to note when you're installing these, if you have your dado stack and you're trying to use it for the first time, which if you are trying to use your dado stack for the first time, check out the video that I put together on dado stack specifically. But you want to make sure that all of your blades are interspaced with each other so that you don't get any overlap. The worst thing that you can do for your dado stack is let your blades touch at any point while they're going through the cutting. You want to make sure that they're clocked out and spaced properly from one blade to the next. Oh, also, always make sure that you're installing your blades so that they are cutting in the correct direction. Your table saw will be cutting towards you, which means you want to face your blade towards you in this. If you put them in backwards, you're gonna have a real bad time. Before I make those last cuts on the round piece that fits the fan into it, because that took a decent amount of work to get that ready, I cut the back only so that I can test these walls to make sure that they fit in there properly. Perfect, ready to go. Now that I have everything dry fit together, what I want to do is cut the centers out for the filters. Now, as you can see, the filters are smaller, and that's what I wanted. And so what I'm going to do is basically measure the inside of this, which should be 18 by 18, which is what we had done previously. Basically measure the inside from paper to paper so that this piece can rest on the plywood all the way around, and I can put some weather gasket in here or just seal this around the edge more generally. So basically the way that I'm going to do that is just mark it all the way around and then again take my jigsaw and then just cut in a straight line. Hopefully straight lines are a little bit easier than circles, wing and hope. And then I'm going to cut these out so that I can fit all my filters in. Okay, and with all those frames cut, I want to double check one more time to make sure that my fan's going to fit through this before I get everything assembled and I can't fit my fan inside. There we go, easy peasy. Alrighty, next up I'm going to start assembling everything, and the way that I'm going to assemble this is by using glue in the seams and brad nails to hold it together. Now if you haven't used brad nails before, the purpose of brad nails is not to structurally hold things together. It is meant to tack things together just long enough that wood glue can take hold. That way I don't need to have 1,000,001 clamps, and I can keep working with my part even after I have glued everything together. Whereas with clamps, a lot of times I have to clamp it and wait because the clamps get in the way. So I'm going to start by putting the back down here and then basically building it up in this direction. And I'm not going to worry about what's on the inside yet because I've got tons of open access through those filter windows to get my fan in, to get other things mounted, but I think it should be good. that things are starting to take shape, it's a little bit easier to see. I'm gonna have a filter on the bottom, 1, 2, 3 on the sides, and then the top is gonna be solid so that I have something to mount it to. And then I decided to put a filter on the bottom instead of a filter on the top because it's gonna be pretty close to my ceiling, and rather than just sucking in air from this much distance, well, in a gap that's this close to the ceiling, I would rather have it sucking in from the bottom. So I decided to put a filter there. But the last things that I need to do are to mount the fan inside this opening, to mount the switch right here, run the cord through the bottom, mount the filters on the sides, and then get the mounting hardware to the top. So let's go ahead and tackle getting the fan on the inside here, and then I will figure out what I need to do for the controls that are gonna sit right there. Okay, I'm actually gonna call an audible on this. So the fan is gonna get installed just like this here. However, on the controller, I am going to just leave it within the box. Now, that may seem counterintuitive, but the reason why is I am never going to be shifting this between 3, 2, or 1. I'm just going to be leaving it on the maximum setting that I can. Now, the only thing that this won't allow me to do is to turn it off manually from outside unless I'm just unplugging it. But one of the upgrades that I was planning on doing is to put a switch on the plug so that I can use a remote control to get this started and to use a timer on it. So rather than trying to go through the complication of mounting this to the outside of the box here, I'm just gonna leave it inside the box and leave it on full blast. And if for some reason I need to change it to another setting, I can always move it or reduce it or add that feature later. But right now, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to just leave this on 3. Inside the box, and then I'm going to run the power out the bottom right here. And actually, audible, as much as it's going to bug me to have the Lasco logo on the outside upside down, I think it's gonna be better if I rotate my fan 180 degrees so that the cord is going out the top. And with the cord going out the top, that's going to allow me to run the cable across the ceiling rather than trying to come out the bottom, back up the side, and then out to my outlets. Because as you can see in my shop, I've got an outlet there, and an outlet there, but all my outlets are basically on my ceiling, so it doesn't do me much good to have it coming out the bottom unless I was going to be going off to a wall, but my power's on the ceiling. So rotate the fan, pop it through the top there, leave this guy on full blast, and then we'll go ahead and get some of the other stuff installed. Alrighty, so a quick view of what that looked like to fasten down the fan, because it's kind of hard to get the camera in here while I'm working. But I use these things called offset clips, 4 places all the way around, and actually a 5th place up here at the top. But these are normally used for holding down canvas, I think. But they worked perfectly because basically they just stair step up from the outside and then can apply some downward pressure to the fan. And even with only 5 of them, I'm feeling really good about how well these things are holding. And the coolest part is these are exactly the same types of clips that I'm going to be using to put the filters on the outside, except I've got 1-inch offset clips as opposed to 1/8 offset clips. Anyways, really nifty, cool device. I always love finding new, good hardware. But if you guys are looking to secure something in a similar fashion, offset clips might be the way to go. Alrighty, before I install the filters on each one of the different faces, I want to go ahead and run a bead of caulk all the way around the inside of this so that I can make sure that any of the cracks that are on any of these seams are nice and well sealed. That way I get the best possible airflow through the filters as opposed to around the filters. You know, sometimes I make myself laugh with not thinking through what future Josh is going to need to do, like reaching into these tight corners while the fan is still installed. Yeah, it's a no-go. Also, I am not going to win any awards with this caulk job all the way through here, but as you can see, every single one of the seams all the way around has a nice, even, fat bead of caulk smoothed into the corners so that I can reduce the amount of airflow that might try and sneak around the filters. Again, this is probably overkill, but it was like $6 for the caulk, and it should be a lot easier. It's stuff like this that's gonna be causing me issues, and I'm just gonna get a rubber grommet for that. Now we'll go ahead, reinstall the fan, and then start to put the filters in all the way around. And the filters, I'm going to use the offset clips, the 1-inch offset clips, 2 on the bottom, 1 on the top, not trying to over constrain it, just trying to give it enough that I can get them in place, held securely. And the benefit to doing it like that is that the one that I have on top, or the one that I have on one of the sides, is the only one that I'll need to take off before I can take and replace the entire filter, rather than needing to do a whole bunch of screwing and unscrewing in order to replace the filters. First filter installed went pretty well. As you saw there was a little bit of an audible that I needed to call because the 1-inch offset clips for the 1-inch filters, they're not actually 1 inch thick, or they're not actually 1 inch tall. I can actually, here, I'll just tell you which one's which, because it'll matter for you guys if you're putting this together. Yeah, the filters aren't 1 inch tall. Filters are closer to 3/4 of an inch, so I just happen to have some sponge window seal around, which will actually help them to seal up against the plywood better anyways. But it's a 1/4 inch sponge seal, and basically what I did is I just applied some around the perimeter right here, and then I actually needed to, instead of just using 3, I had to use 5, because when I put it up against it, it was not holding nice and tight up against the seal. So if you're going to be doing this, note that 1-inch filters are not actually 1 inch thick. 1-inch filters are closer to 3/4 of an inch thick. So if you can get 3/4 inch offset clips, do that. Otherwise, just plan on having a 1/4 inch seal. I am going to pause because I am now out of sponge, and I will be back in just a couple of seconds for you, a couple of who knows how long for me, so that I can get more sponge so that I can finish sealing off the rest of this. And boom, just like that. And there we go, filters all installed all the way around. On the far side, because I only had 3 of the regular HVAC filters, I installed one of my K&N washable filters that I got a while back for my very first air filtration system in the shop, which worked okay. It was just because I attached it to a box fan, it didn't work as well as it could. But yeah, so I use this on the 4th side. I'll probably go and get another one of these because these are rated, I think, MERV 13, and I don't think this one is, so I need to get this one up to snuff, but for now it should be great. You may have also seen me fighting with a weather stripping, and that was as I got down to the end of the roll and as it was cool in my shop. I think right now it's 46 degrees in here, so nice and chilly. Problem that I ran into is that the adhesive did not want to stick to the wood, so I really had to work it in to get the PSA to activate. So if you're going to be applying this, better to apply it in a warm shop when everything wants to run and stick, because the adhesive will stick to the wood better. And then also, as you get down to the end of a roll, it's just got more bend to it, and so it wants to try and uncurl itself in this cold weather. So if you can apply it in a warm shop, all the better. But I think I got everything stuck down properly, and now that I've got the filter on it all the way around, it should help to keep pressure on it. And then hopefully, once my shop warms up for the first time, everything will stick properly. Last but not least, what I need to do is come over to this side, which will be the top, and install my hardware. Now the plan for the hardware is basically 3 mounting points. I'm going to put 2, I don't really know, but I'm going to put 3 mounting points on here, and then it'll go to hooks up in the ceiling. Alrighty, so the specific hardware that I'm using to hang this is in the top of my air filter. I'm going to have these cable end tie downs. These are intended for cables that have a loop in the end, but I checked to make sure that they fit through the chain that I got here. And I can't remember exactly what the gauge of chain was, but I think it was rated at 100 pounds a piece. And so if I've got 3 of these, I've got 300 pounds theoretically, so I should be totally fine with the amount of chain that I have. And then into the ceiling, I'm going to throw these hooks so that I can loop the chain around this. So theoretically, these guys are going to get mounted into here. Chains will get hooked onto there. They will stay on permanently. And then I've got the hooks in the ceiling that I can hang it from. And as I was thinking through it more, I do think I want to put 2 of the chains here at the front, because I've got the fan that's sitting here at the front, which is going to be heavier than the rest of it. So I'm going to put 2 chains in the front, 1 chain in the back, and yeah, it should work. Now comes a very important question. Where on my ceiling would I like to mount my air filtration? And there's a lot of theories about how you ought to do this. And on ShopHacks, they talked about this a little bit. The consensus that they had come to is that somewhere on about the center line of the shop, blowing in one direction so that theoretically you can get a circular motion like this. Now for me, my outlet is right here and right up here that I can plug into so I can go on either side. Now in my shop, I've got a lot of storage and a lot of tools on that side, whereas on this side, I've got my jointer, my bandsaw, my router, my dust collection, and my thought is, right now, because of how bad my dust collection is, and this is not a good dust-free setup, but my thought is this is going to be probably the #1 producer of dust for me, plus all of the tools that I have on this side. So my thought is I want to have it up here pointing in that direction so that all of the dusty air coming through my shop gets sucked in there, and then it can filter down around this side. There's a couple of different ways that you can do it. If you guys have a better idea of where to put it in my shop, this is always something that I can move, and I would love to hear from you as to where you think it ought to go. But right now, I'm going to get it mounted up here, and unfortunately, that means I might need to move my flag because I think it's going to be shadowed by where the air filtration is. But we can always do that here in a second. But I'm going to try and mount it up right around in here so that I can plug it into that outlet up there. Okay, kind of cool trick for screwing in these eye hooks. If you've done these before, you know that they can be kind of a pain in the butt because you have to start them by hand, but then there's no real good way to attach your drill to this to get it in the rest of the way, unless you have another eye hook. This is just an eye hook that I had left over from another project, and I basically bent the eye open just a little bit, and I'm going to chuck my screwdriver onto the end right here. Then once I get this started by hand, I can cinch this guy around, and as long as I've got tension on this so that it doesn't just come up and slide off, I can use my drill to put these guys in. Super, super helpful when you're trying to do eye hooks. Broke my eye hook. Man, that's frustrating. Well, I guess having a little tiny eye hook trying to screw in a bigger eye hook is no-go, so I had to pull out the big guns. But nominally, this is a pretty good trick if you're trying to do it around the house. I guess I just haven't worked with eye hooks as large as the ones that I'm trying to install. But that's good, because it means they should hold great. Alrighty, now time to get that up here. Let's see if we can't do it. Holy cow, that thing is big, but it's actually lighter than I expected it to be. Now that I have it on there, you can see that it's way too low in the shop. I'm going to hit my head on it as I go through. So I'm going to try and get it moved up, but one of the things that I realized is that the chain links are just barely too small, so I kind of had to force them on. But the benefit is now that I have it hanging up, one at a time I can work around and adjust this until I get it up to the right height and sitting level where I want it. And, as Captain Ahab might say, there she blows. I actually went around and I was feeling the filters all the way around, and I can feel the air getting sucked into it. Like I can feel the air blowing past my hands all the way around. Man, that's exciting. One giant downside that I see to this that I think I can fix is this thing is gigantic. So if I was to go back and build this over again, I would build it much smaller, much more compact. You don't need all of this space right here. It can go almost dead even, and you can make these guys a lot smaller, these gaps a lot smaller, so that it's basically just filters all the way around. But this should get the trick done. What I think I'm gonna have to end up doing is both plug that spot on the top with a grommet, shorten these guys right here, and I can't stretch, chains don't stretch, but I can't stretch it any higher. So what I think I'm gonna do is get some carabiners or get something, some chain ties so that I can actually loop it around the hooks and then tie them at the bottom so that I can get them just a little bit tighter than where they are right now. But overall, I mean, just feeling the airflow coming through this guy, man, that's gonna be so awesome. And then if I reach around to the front, there is so much air coming out there. So I am thrilled, and I'm excited to see how well this guy works. And we'll have to do an update video at some point, but this is very similar, not exactly, but very similar to the ShopHacks build. Again, check out the link in the description, and he or she, I don't know who it is, did a phenomenal write-up on it. So anyways, if you guys have any questions, leave them in the comment section down below. And thank you guys for joining. I appreciate it. Talk to you later. Happy woodworking. Make some dust to be caught with this guy. Talk to you later. Bye.